Hey there, this morning I had the privilege of talking to the wonderful Rachel Carthy about her IBD, her journey with Crohn's, and her journey with a stoma bag and the surgery behind it. How she's overcome the difficulties of having a stoma from being a teenager with Crohn's and growing up, and then finally trying to start a family despite her Crohn's and her stoma diagnoses. This journey is an incredible journey of resilience and strength and the power of a positive mindset from the offset. You will learn so many things about having a stoma, how to keep your mind focused on the positive, setting goals during surgery, and how you too can get to the other end with little tips on how to deal with your stoma on a day-to-day basis and going through pregnancy with the stoma. It's a fantastic interview and I invite you to watch it with me. The idea behind this video series is that I am bringing loads of different women from all different surgery backgrounds to share their experiences, to share their key tips and their learning experiences from each of them so that it can touch the lives of other women who are maybe nervous about to go into their own surgery or are struggling after their surgery to get used to how their bodies are working differently and what life looks for them after surgery. The reason that I am that I've connected with a load of stoma patients, even though right now I do not have a stoma. About a year ago, I had a climbing accident and I had to have a stoma during the recovery of it for about 6 months. And I've broken all my bones. I can totally deal with broken bones, no worries, done that before, fine. But a stoma was a different kettle of fish. Having my intestines on the outside of my body, shitting in a bag, it was something that my mind really struggled to get over. And even though I have a really strong recovery mindset, this played on every single insecurity I had. And I really struggled for a long time with that. But something that I found was unbelievably helpful for my journey was watching these Instagrammers, watching these influencers with their stomas, just rocking life, having a normal life, learning from them their little tips of how to go by day to day, learning which products work for them. It was just an absolute lifesaver, and I realized I wasn't alone, and other women that were as young as me were having exactly the same experience as me. And it was just so liberating and just kept me calmer and moving forwards in my recovery. So that is why I'm releasing this little video series of ladies that have also had these issues. So watch to the end. The interview is absolute gold. I will warn you that this is my first time doing this, so I accidentally did not put my microphone on at the beginning of the interview. So the parts where you see me going like this with no sound, I'm afraid the microphone is off. But the little story I just told you was exactly the story that I told in the interview. And to be honest, it's not about me. It's about Rachel, her journey, her recovery, and just her spectacularly inspirational journey. So I hope you enjoy it. I hope it helps you. I hope it gives you some hope that if you are struggling with IBD and you're worried about the fact that you might not be able to get pregnant, what happens if you do get pregnant when you have a stoma or IBD, this is the interview for you.
And I imagine when people had these operations, in like kind of 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, when there was no access to anything online and probably other people's stories, and it must have been so much harder because even when I had my first surgery, there wasn't as much online as there is now to find out about things. And I mean, I'll be honest, I was fairly ignorant to stomas and I had Crohn's, and I couldn't have told you what a stoma was before I knew about it for my first surgery, because I think I'm someone that's kind of like, I don't want to know too much about something unless I know it's going to affect me, because otherwise you can just start thinking all sorts of things. It's like that whole thing of, you Google if you've got a migraine and it's like you've got 2 hours to live. So it's like you don't want to go down a rabbit hole of like, surgical possibilities because of Crohn's. So I was just, trying to happily kind of live my life being maybe fairly ignorant. And then I knew about like people needing catheters, and I knew more about that side and anything related to bladder, because I think, not that it's more common, but I think, you know, maybe somebody might have had an older relative that's had that, or maybe somebody's been in hospital and they have that after an operation. Whereas to me, yeah, stoma, it was completely new. So I am grateful that there's now more out there, like on the internet and in online communities, for anyone going through surgery, facing surgery, because I think it would be a really big help. Yeah. So I have made a few notes so I can try and keep it structured with any questions. Oh, yeah, yeah. So I had quite a lengthy diagnosis for Crohn's, and I was actually diagnosed with ulcerative colitis first. My symptoms, it was when I was like in my late teens, and they were, you know, tummy ache, rushing to the toilet, and I'll be honest, having accidents, like sometimes not getting there in time, and blood and mucus in my stool. And unfortunately, even to get any kind of IBD diagnosis, that took quite a long time. And to start with, I remember my like local GP thought it was like some kind of abscess or something more external. So even to get to like the stage of IBD and then find out what it was, whether it was ulcerative colitis or Crohn's, that took quite a while. So I probably first had those symptoms when I was 16, 15, 16, and I had an official, but basically by 18, we knew that it was Crohn's, and I kind of started on medication for that. But obviously that's a tricky time because, you know, in the UK, that age, you're at high school, you're doing like your A levels. I was just about to obviously start university. So it's a tough time. And obviously at the time, yeah, it was just a Crohn's diagnosis. I didn't have any surgery originally. I just had like investigative procedures for things like colonoscopies, like to find out what was actually going on. And then I had a very long time of you know, flare ups, not all the time, but just years where I'd have periods of remission and I'd have flare ups and I'd go on different medication. Obviously, sometimes not very nice medication like steroids that, you know, have like lots of like other, although they helping you internally, they obviously have other side effects that aren't great to be on long term. And even though sometimes I had really bad Crohn's flares, I still, I guess, sort of thought myself fairly lucky because I never had any surgery. So I know some people that, you know, have various sections of their bowel kind of removed, you know, every now and then they'll go in for surgeries. And sometimes I would meet someone or I'd chat to someone like online in one of the Facebook support groups who would tell me they'd had like 15 surgeries for Crohn's, like removing little bits of bowel at a time. And I just used to feel like real empathy for people because I thought, you know, you're completely asleep for those surgeries. You know, you're going under like every time you have those done, and there's recovery every time. And I just counted myself, I guess, quite lucky that although I was on not very nice medication, I at least hadn't needed any surgery. And then when it came to the time to have my stoma, I also felt fairly lucky because it was almost like the decision was out of my hands because my Crohn's was so bad that it was like I needed that surgery. And I do speak to some people that are kind of weighing things up and deciding whether to have a stoma and whether it would manage their condition a bit better. And I didn't have that. I had a flare up, basically one flare up that was just so bad that I tried biologicals for the first time, kind of via IV, and they just didn't touch it. We tried all sorts of different new medications and just couldn't get it under control. And so I again felt quite lucky because it was almost like the decision was out of my hands. It was like, you need this surgery and there's not really a lot you can sort of, you know, come back and think, what are the alternatives? So I did explore all options, kind of medication wise, because the surgery I had, there's no like reversal from. Basically, that it's kind of end surgery. So I wanted to know, you know, that I'd explored all medical options before I went down that route. And I think you know your own body, don't you? And when this flare up happened, it was in maybe the start of autumn 2014, I want to say. And I knew straight away like something was different, and it just hit me a bit harder than any other flare up. And that took until maybe about, I think it was March the following year that I had my first surgery. So yeah, we explored medication, and then the first surgery I actually had was a loop ileostomy, which is like two of them next to one another, like double parked as it was.
So you had two stomas next to each other.
Yeah.
Wow.
So which was tough because I also still had everything going on with Crohn's, and I still had everything intact in terms of you know, like my colon and my rectum and all of that part. So it was hard because it was learning to live with, like you say, two stomas that I'll be honest, they were massive, and I've kept a bag from the time that I'd cut out and obviously not used. I've just kept it to see the size of them, and compared to the stoma I have now, when I look at the size of that, I'm like, how did I manage that on a day-to-day basis? Because as well as living with a stoma for the first time, I was also still having the Crohn's symptoms because nearly everything was all still joined up. So you were living with a stoma as well as still having like blood and mucus and really not nice things kind of, you know, coming out your back end. And I think it was really hard for my parents in particular because they were kind of seeing that this surgery was meant to have been helping me, and obviously it was the Crohn's symptoms, and let's add in a stoma to cope with as well. And I was still on medication. We were still trying medication at that time because that surgery could have been reversible, you know, because I hadn't had everything removed. Like, you know, yourself, everything could have kind of been popped back in and I could have been sewn up. But yeah, unfortunately, I had, I want to say, almost 2 years of living with that. And then I had a permanent stoma. And the operation is a pan-proctocolectomy, which is like your colon out, and then everything below that, basically. So it's like your rectum and your anus, everything is sewn up. So there's no going back because that's like it's gone, like the muscle's gone, everything's stitched up and it's healed over. And a lot of people in the IBD community call it like a Barbie butt or a Ken butt because you've got no hole at the back. So if you ever hear somebody, you know, everybody like wants to make light of these things. So if you ever hear somebody or see on somebody's profile, you know, like stoma and Barbie butt, that's what that means, which I think is cute.
It kind of diffuses the seriousness of it. Hey?
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, obviously, because I'd kind of had a bit of a trial run of living with a stoma, it was actually maybe even like easier for me because this thing was so much smaller than the double stoma that was huge. And I obviously had the other symptoms removed. It was obviously kind of a lengthier recovery surgery wise because you've had abdominal surgery and you've also had everything that's gone on at the back. So, you know, you had to be a lot more careful, like sitting down and using a pressure cushion and everything and laying on the side a bit more. But I was very lucky, and that surgery I healed really well because, especially kind of at the back, you can sometimes get, you know, wounds opening up and having to, you know, go back and having that addressed. And mine healed like really well and really neatly. And yeah, I was really grateful that I had good recovery from that surgery. And I knew it was the right thing at the time because obviously my Crohn's was bad, that I knew something had to happen. And obviously there are some things you think about with surgery like that, like obviously they discussed fertility with me because Luke and I hadn't started a family then. And you know, with any abdominal surgery, obviously there's like a risk of affecting your fertility. But the stage I was at with my Crohn's, I was so poorly that we definitely couldn't have even thought of starting a family, you know, because my body wasn't healthy enough to, you know, wanting to put a baby in there and you know, grow and go to full term and everything. So I just thought, you know, this needs to happen. And then if we can't have a baby after it, well, you know, at least I'm like living my healthy life, you know, which you need to get yourself sorted first before you can obviously even start about thinking about bringing a baby into your body. But luckily, obviously, I have Jack. He's just turned 2, so it didn't affect my fertility, because when we knew that it was the right time for us and we started trying, I got pregnant like literally straight away, which was obviously
Fabulous.
like amazing. It wasn't like years or, you know, help from IVF or anything like that. So we were very, very lucky that, yeah, it hadn't affected me and we could still start a family. And then, yeah, pregnancy with the stoma, I didn't have like any issues. Obviously, there's a little bit of kind of, as your body grows, your bag is a little bit further away from you and kind of under the bump. So there's kind of a bit of management of your stoma care. Yeah, but nothing, you know, like no like symptoms or anything that affected, you know, me or Jack during the pregnancy that was just down to my stoma. And then I think as well, a lot of people wonder if you can have like I want to say like natural like vaginal birth, like through the vaginal canal when you have a stoma, and when you've had the operation that I've had, which is everything at the back removed, and you definitely can, and that's what the plan was for me. But just things right at the end of the pregnancy that just kind of came up and happened meant that I had an emergency cesarean in the end. So, which again is possible with a stoma, because some people think that it's not, because, you know, it's obviously quite close to your stoma site, and they wonder if, you know, you can still have that surgery, because it is surgery and it's big surgery. And I think it was only after I'd had the cesarean that I realized how big a surgery a cesarean is, and kind of, you know, how many layers are cut through. And yeah, but it's mind boggling to me. I think I understand the stoma and can accept the stoma surgery a bit more, that is something that happens. Whereas the cesarean, I look at my scar and, you know, it's probably like that. And I'm like, how did the baby come out of that? So yeah, it's amazing what they can do now. And I was lucky with my stoma surgeries that both of them were laparoscopic. So they were through like it was keyhole surgery. So I have those marks on my abdomen, you know, that are very faint, that are almost, they go like the kind of stretch mark kind of look to them. But I don't have you know, like major kind of abdominal scarring apart from the C-section. And I also didn't realize until really recently, I think, that a C-section scar, it can be the way that I've got it, which is kind of horizontal, or it can be vertical. I didn't realize that kind of, you know, you can get different variations. And I guess maybe sometimes it's based on size of baby and maybe how quick you want to get baby out if it's a real emergency. So yeah, that's kind of where I am with sort of, I guess, Crohn's and my surgeries and sort of scarring that I've got. Yeah, that helps.
Oh yeah, no, that's an amazing story. That's as even I'm curious about your double stoma. Because
Yeah.
I mean, my stoma was just kind of like one poking out. When you had a double, did you have, is it two in one kind of thing, or is it like?
Yeah, it's they are literally next to one another. So it was the
Okay.
same stoma bag, which was very difficult because they were probably like that, and that's not an exaggeration. They were really big. Like, I've kept the stoma bag with the template,
Yeah.
and I did have difficulty sometimes, like getting the bag to stay on, because I was cutting it like a bit wider than really like the I guess the like restriction, like the perimeter around the bag, that, you know, they always have a little they have like, you know, the measurements so that you can see where to cut for your stoma, and the widest part of the bag that I use, like the biggest kind of circumference, I was cutting over that because it was just massive. And yeah, sometimes having problems with getting the bag to stick as a result of that. And just having, one of them is called a mucus fistula. So like one was the stoma and one is called like the mucus fistula. And I just remember that sometimes being like really, really leaky, you know. And I remember we had a wedding in Cyprus that we'd gone to. And I remember like some of the nights there, like just sitting on the loo waiting for this thing to kind of like drain and do what it was going to do before I put a bag on. So kind of obviously sitting on the toilet and just letting it do its thing, because if I pop my bag on, it's just going to fill up really quickly with this mucousy liquid, and then I'll just keep emptying it anyway. So I might as well stay here. And then, you know, when you're obviously wanting to wear kind of like smart dresses and nice outfits when you're on somebody's kind of, you know, you're abroad for like a wedding and celebrations. So actually the stoma for me was like, it was like a godsend after this like double stoma, and for me it was way more manageable. So I guess again I was lucky, because, you know, some people kind of probably go for stoma surgery and they're like, you know, this is it for the rest of your life and this is what you're going to be dealing with. Whereas to me, I was kind of like, thank goodness, like compared to what I had for the past couple of years. And obviously also it meant that I was off medication. So I'm really lucky that since I've had my permanent stoma, I don't have, touch wood, you know, at the moment, I don't have any medication for my Crohn's, and it's just in remission. And, you know, I'm not naive. I know that my Crohn's can come back, because although I've had so much removed, you know, Crohn's can affect, it's any part of the digestive system. So it's like from obviously like your mouth, like all the way down. And I know that I may need stoma surgery in the future, because people have, you know, they can like refashion, they call it like refashioning surgery. So if for whatever reason something happened with my stoma and, you know, maybe it wasn't spouting in the right way anymore and we needed to look at it, or the size became unmanageable or something like that. So I know that there could be potentially things, you know, in the future, because, you know, I'm not like in my teens anymore, but I'm also not, you know, like 85. Like I've got a long time, hopefully, a lot of years living with this stoma. So something might need to happen. But I always just think, you know, I had some really, really like horrendous dark days with Crohn's symptoms, and I would take like any kind of stoma refashioning surgery or even medication over what I had in the past with Crohn's. Like I would never want to go back to that. So anything I could take on anything, I think, because it's not going to be as bad as what I've had.
Yeah. That's it.
Yeah.
You've got the most fantastic mindset around this. Like, you're just so positive, like with everything. It's just like, I mean, it's a lot, you know, it is a lot. And you've just got the most wonderful mindset, and sort of just like, yeah, I'm lucky. And I love that. I love that, because it sometimes when I've talked to a lot of ladies that they've had one surgery and then something else will come up, and they're just like, no, I just did all this work, I just recovered. And a lot of them sort of get stuck in this like, no, I've done this before, I don't want to do it again. And they just get stuck in this terrible sort of negative spiral about just like, no, I fought my war, I won, and why do I have to do this again? And getting trapped in that kind of mindset of just like, oh, it's just, I'm not worth it, or it's kind of like I'm not enough, or it's just like, what's the point? And it's such a shame, because it's just like, it's a shit time, but it's not a shit life. And it's just wonderful to hear sort of like everything you've been through, that you're still like, no, I'm still going. I know I've still got this, and yeah, it's not as bad as it was. I feel much better. So it's just gorgeous to hear. Could we just run over, if you got any sort of just tips for anybody that's got a stoma or Crohn's, or just anything that you've learned that you were just like, shit, man, I wish I knew that earlier. That would just be incredible.
I tried to have a little think about some notes. I think for me, stoma specific, one of the things I'd say is I always, you know, if I'm having a bad day, I'm not going to lie, you know, sometimes obviously there are not down days, but little road bumps that you hit with the stoma. And maybe I'll have like a leak. You know, I was going out a few weeks ago with friends. I was literally just about to leave the house, you know, and I realized that I always have a little check when I go to the loo, you know, just check my base plate, check nothing's happening. And I realized I was going to have a leak basically if I didn't change my bag. And I could have risked it, you know, and gone and seen how long it kind of held out. But obviously all my friends know that I have a stoma. So I'd message them just to say, you know, I'm going to really quickly change my bag because I don't want to be out there, you know, enjoying our afternoon worrying about this. So I just changed my bag and obviously kind of get on with my day, because to me, I always try and think of my stoma when I think of the size of it. I'm fairly tall, and I'm like, my stoma is tiny. It's like whatever percentage of my body, probably like 1% of my body mass or whatever. Like, this thing is tiny, and I always try and think in that mindset that I'm not going to let that kind of rule my life, because it's like a tiny part of my body. And obviously I'm grateful for it, and it's a very important part of my body because it lets me obviously live the life, a great quality of life. But I'm not going to kind of let it overcome and overpower me, in terms of, even if I had, you know, like 6 leaks a day, I'd still just keep changing my bag and go out. I wouldn't sit at home, because I just think I can have coping mechanisms. You know, I can take spare clothes with me, I can take spare underwear, I can take like a change supply kit, but I'm not going to ever let it kind of, you know, like rule my life, is what I'd say. So that's one thing I'd say to somebody like facing, you know, something specific like stoma surgery coming up, is like, you are much bigger. I'm not saying like better, but you are like much bigger, and there's so much more to you than a stoma, and you can still live like an amazing life and kind of overcome things like leaks. And I think in those early days of surgery, sometimes it's trial and error, and it can sometimes be a bit difficult getting products that work and getting a routine that works for you. There are so many products and suppliers out there, and, you know, stoma nursing teams and specialists that will help you. And you shouldn't see something like, you know, leaks or having issues with your products or not getting on with the routine. That's not the norm for somebody with a stoma. Like, you shouldn't be living like that. And there will be something out there, both like products and a routine, that will mean you can have a really good quality of life. So they're kind of some of the things I'd say about stoma specific surgery. I think what you've touched on with like a positive mindset, that does, I'll be honest, it massively helps. And I think when I went into both my surgeries, it's obviously important that you're, you know, at some level of kind of physical fitness, especially for abdominal surgery, because you want to come back from that. But I think probably even more important than that is a positive mindset. And I think having, like, for me personally, having goals that I wanted to try and hit. And when I had my second surgery, I spoke to a guy, and, you know, it was a guy, so it was slightly different because he's got slightly different anatomy, but he'd gone in for the same operation. I spoke to him through a Facebook support group, because he'd had a panproctocolectomy. And I spoke to him just about some of the things around surgery, but I also wanted to see how long he was in hospital for. And he was in and out with that surgery in a week. And, you know, that's major surgery. But I remember having that in my mind going in for that surgery as almost like a goal, and thinking, I was very lucky that I was down to have surgery on a Monday. So that made it easier for me to think about how long I was in there for. And I was also lucky in that it was only me and one other person that was having some sort of surgery, bowel surgery, with that particular surgeon that day. And they were an inpatient. So I got seen first and I had my surgery, which obviously, you know, sometimes isn't the case. You go through all the prep and everything. You can get there on the day and it doesn't happen. And I didn't beat myself up. You know, you've got to be realistic and think, I could get an infection on this ward, and that's not my fault and nothing to do with me. There can be setbacks. And I also needed a few different teams to sign me off to discharge. And, you know, all it would have taken is one of those teams to kind of be understaffed and not be doing the rounds and sign me off and everything. So I had allowances, you know, I wasn't being really hard on myself. But at the same time, I had in my head, I could be going home on Friday. You know, I could be going home on Friday and sitting at home with with Luke and my mum having a Chinese like in my lounge. I like pictured that, and I know it's almost like manifesting. It's going down that route, and that's exactly what happened. I was very lucky, you know, nothing happened during the week, and I came home on Friday. And I think if I hadn't spoken to that guy on Facebook and hadn't got in my mind, each day I was getting up, I was trying to walk around the ward, I was, you know, had that real positive like, physios, what do you want me to do, I can do it, like, you know, 10 times kind of thing. I think it's very easy to just kind of sit there and get in the routine in hospital. You know, all your food is brought to you, and just wait for the nurses to kind of tell you when you can go. And I could have been in there for weeks. So I think sometimes taking charge and taking ownership and thinking, obviously I want the care and I want to be kind of discharged, you know, in a safe manner, but also I want to be home, you know, I want to be with my partner and I want to be recovering there. So I do think if I didn't have that mindset going into that surgery, it would have been easier to kind of, you know, sit in bed and kind of, you know, just be a little bit maybe depressed about everything. But I just couldn't wait to get out and obviously be like Crohn's symptoms free and kind of start living my life. So I do think having like a real positive mindset, having some goals that you can set yourself, whether it's, you know, right, I'm going to have this surgery and let's be realistic about when I want to be home, or start thinking about things that you're wanting to do when you're home. And I think with a stoma, you know, I can do pretty much everything that I did before I had my stoma. It's just that some elements of my life I need to make little adaptations to. And that's what I'd say. Like, you know, you can probably do everything that you loved before, but, you know, certainly in those early stages after surgery, things like weights at the gym, you know, like you're going to have to go back to that, obviously, go back to basics. And, you know, that's nothing to do with your kind of anything to do with you personally. That's just a fact that obviously after that surgery, that's what you're going to need to look at. And even now, you know, I'm quite careful because I've had a prolapse stoma and I've had a hernia that was repaired in my second surgery. So I always wear a really like hardcore kind of support belt when I'm exercising. And even now, there's some things that I'm a little bit kind of like, just need to be a little bit careful with that, because I know that that area is weak. You know, I have a hole in my abdomen and, you know, with wet bowel coming out. And, you know, it doesn't matter how kind of like fit you are, that's still something that you need to take into consideration. But it definitely doesn't make me sit there and kind of think, oh, I can't do things that I used to like. You can, you might just have to tweak them a little bit. And I think just be really grateful that you can still do those things and you're not, you know, maybe sat at home with Crohn's symptoms that are like horrendous. So probably that as well, you know, just look at small kind of adaptations that you might need to make to kind of like hobbies and interests and everything. I think also I've written down like real baby steps and taking it kind of one day at a time. And I think, you know, not thinking too much in the future, like if you're not married yet, you know, and you're thinking like, how the hell am I going to get a wedding dress to look nice over a stoma? Or, you know, like maybe you haven't started a family yet and you're worried that like, you know, that operation has affected your fertility and everything. There's so many like what ifs. It's no point sat there kind of really worrying about them and worrying about the future. I think, you know, whatever surgery you'll have had, that's a massive thing to go through. So just take it real baby steps, one day at a time. You know, maybe it's the first day that you're going out for a walk once you're at home and you're recovering. That's amazing. If it's the first time you've been outside on your own for like a walk around the block, that's an achievement. And I just think, you know, take small wins as like real successes. And I think kind of aligned to that, I've put just compare yourself to kind of just compare you to you and maybe what you've done in the past and maybe what you're looking to in the future, because there's no point kind of, you know, looking around at your friends and thinking what they're doing if you've had this like major surgery, or looking at somebody else. You know, it's easy, we all do it when you look at social media posts and maybe somebody in a similar community for what you've had the surgery for, and think, well, they had that surgery like a week ago and they've gone on like a round the world cruise, or, you know, whatever it is that you're seeing. you don't know people's personal circumstances. You don't know what support system they've got, compared to you. So I think, I got into running through park run, and it's that that aligns with that whole, you just compare like your achievements to yourself. And that's a massive thing at park run, because park run is always kind of promoted that it's not a race and you're not in competition with anybody else, and your time is just kind of for you to compare with like other park runs that you've done. And I think that's the same just in most elements of what should be like our lives, really. Just kind of compare you to like, okay, well, I've done this today, which was like way better than what happened yesterday, if you had like a bit of a setback. And I think also just on a positive, to try and end all of that on a bit of a positive, it's just kind of to appreciate what our bodies are capable of and what we can go through, like
100%.
whatever surgery you've had, that's still major, whether it's, you've gone in for some sort of like horrendous trauma through like, and like an ambulance, like some sort of accident emergency, or whether it's planned surgery and it's for a long-term health condition and maybe you knew that surgery was coming for a long time. I think it's just taking a step back and thinking, this is okay, it's amazing that surgery even exists, and like people that are really intelligent people are out there that know what to do with this condition. And then just think, you're still, up and about, walking around, like thinking of what you're going to be doing that day, what you're going to be eating, all of that. It's like amazing what your body can go through and kind of come out the other side and recover from it. And I think not just stoma surgery, but obviously like my C-section has made me think that obviously even more, because sometimes not so much now, but definitely when I'd first given birth, obviously a C-section wasn't my plan, and it was quite sad for me that had to happen, and I hadn't had what I think of like a natural birth. But I try and sort of flip it and feel positive. Obviously I'm grateful that happened because Jack is here and he's healthy, and obviously like I'm glad that I got to go through that surgery and still give birth to him. And also just think, how amazing like cesarean surgery is, like that exists, and it can bring a baby out healthy when things were just not good in there, and he was in like a really bad place and needed to come out of very quickly. So I think it's just, having a bit of appreciation for some of the surgeries that we can go through, and that you're able to kind of come out the other side and kind of say, I survived that. And maybe like I've got the scars to prove it, kind of thing. Yeah. That's another thing with scars. I think for me, they're not like to be ashamed of. It's if anybody saw my C-section, if I had like low bikini on or something, I think it's quite obvious it's a C-section scar, and I would never want to hide it, because I'd kind of think, but this is what made me a mummy, this is what gave me Jack, kind of thing, and it's something to be embraced. So
searching for the meaning behind it, the positive meaning behind it, rather than it just being an imperfection on your skin. It's just like, I got my son, got joy.
Yeah, and I've got a few stretch marks, like I'd say like my hips area. I've got a few from when I've had steroids, because I was on them for so long. And again, they don't massively bother me, because I just think, but I know they're from not very nice medication, but that medication kind of kept me going, and it kept my flares under control. And then obviously I've got the one on my shoulder blade, which is, I'll admit it's not the nicest scar. And obviously it's in a more visible area than your abdomen. But again, I had skin cancer, and that's why I've got that scar. So I'd rather have that than like, still, maybe not be here because of skin cancer, So I think we've got to see it as kind of like, they're like markers of what you've been through in your life, and not something, like really horrendous. I mean, maybe I would feel differently if, I had whole facial scarring, because I appreciate that's something different to go through. And I did actually date someone whose friends used to call him Scarface, because he had a scar from here um, basically down most of half of his face, and an ex had thrown, you know, the John Smith's like ceramic ashtrays in bars, like
Oh,
really
yes, that
long,
really, really
like,
like.
yeah, she'd thrown that from like quite a distance, and it had hit and basically opened up his face. But
Oh,
even that, when I met him, obviously it was very noticeable, it was very visible. But I mean, maybe it's personal preference, but I didn't look at him and think like, your whole face is a scar. Like, it wasn't. And then when he started talking to me, it wasn't the only thing that I could think about. You know, it wasn't like I couldn't answer his questions because I was just thinking like, this scar is massive. I just thought like, it's just part of him. It's an unfortunate part of him for him, because obviously it was so horrendous. But it was part of him, and it was what made him him, you know, and
yeah.
like what he'd been through in the past. And I definitely wouldn't ever, you know, I don't know, like not be friends with somebody, not go, I mean, not go out because we're married, but you know, if Luke had had a scar, you know, a really visible scar on maybe an area that you can see of your body really clearly, like your arms, your face or something, I would be interested to a degree, obviously, because you've got that curiosity of kind of like how it happened. But I would just think, you know, it's part of them and their makeup now. And I can never remember the name of it, but I know there's a culture where they repair like ceramics with they
Yes,
like
it's a
they make it really
Japanese.
visible. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, with the gold, and they kind of embrace it and think, okay, it's broken, but we can put it together, and we can kind of make it look really good when we put it together. And I just sort of think, try and see scars like that a little bit more of like a badge of honor kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, beauty in
So,
broken things.
yeah, definitely. Yeah. And it makes us individual, doesn't it? You know, and
Of
it's
course.
a story to
Yeah,
tell.
of course. And it's our strength and it's our resilience. And yeah,
Yeah.
it is our story. And I think it's so important to recognize that and accept that and just celebrate that you are that strong and your body has this
Yeah.
amazing capability to have you standing on two legs. You know what I mean? Have you
Yeah.
give birth, especially like with the stoma and everything like that. So thank you so much for sharing that story, because that's huge. Because I know when I had mine, I was just like, can I do anything with this? And I remember the first time that I was intimate with someone, it was terrifying, but
Yeah.
I was very lucky because that man I trusted, and he was very loving and he was very accepting.
Yeah.
But it is just these baby steps and sort of
Yeah.
working
Yeah.
towards it. So thank you so much for sharing. And thank you so much for sharing everything today and giving